Hey everybody, welcome to Narrative Live. As I gently ease back the music, I'm just playing quite loudly. Hi everybody, welcome to the show. Tracy McElroy is in Baltimore. How are you, Tracy? Nice to see you
I'm
again.
great. How are you, Zeb?
Oh, it's a good long weekend in my faux America here in Canada. I celebrated Memorial Day on your behalf and had a good time.
Thank you. We really appreciate that.
It was good. And we have some really exciting stuff coming up on today's show. We're going to talk
We
about the big
do.
Michael Wolff book that everybody's talking about it, even though no one wants to admit they are talking about it. And we also have some news about the Salvador Mundi, the Da Vinci that isn't the Da Vinci. Plus, we have some breaking news of our own that you've been able to learn. Some really interesting news that could indicate where things are going in the investigation into Trump Russia. So, what is the big breaking news you have, Tracy?
Yeah, right before we went on air tonight, I got a tip, and just so you guys know, I haven't been able to verify all the information yet, but it appears that there may be a grand jury already seated in New York, and they may be readying some state charges related to the Trump family, the Trump administration. I really don't know. That's all I was told.
That is a really significant development, especially because the New York Assembly just recently changed their pardon laws to allow for sort of the double prosecution of crimes.
Exactly right. I believe there was some kind of, they called it a double jeopardy loophole, and they seem to have fixed it. And I think it also involves being able to file state charges related to or similar to federal charges that may have been or would be pardoned by a president.
So, big news, the New York State may be readying charges against people involved in the Trump Russia conspiracy and more. And we believe a grand jury could be seated on those. So we'll keep following you that
Yeah.
story and we'll keep you updated right here on Narrative. But right now, we have even more big news on the starting block. The big news that happened around the world, and it's big because it involves sumo wrestlers,
I thought
UFOs, and Hoop Hicks. It looks like.
Yeah, I thought I'd start off today's news with, just some fun, lighthearted stuff because everything gets so serious all the time. So can we just start with sumo wrestling, Zev?
We are. You don't have to convince me to start with sumo wrestling. I'm just looking at this photograph, thinking, boy, the Trump and Melania look like they got the better angle on this particular shot. I mean, just to be
And
honest.
their posture, they are thoroughly enjoying themselves, can't you tell?
It's always fun to go to sumo wrestling in Japan. So might be a clue that this first story has something to do with Trump being in Japan.
Yeah, and really the story today is, he's back, guys. Air Force One landed, and he is back on U.S. soil.
And that's good news because while he was overseas, he pretty much embarrassed us every step of the way.
He did. He had some really crazy things to say about Joe Biden while he was over there.
Yeah. He didn't get the memo about don't politic while you're on a foreign trip, don't use the national stage and America's goodwill in the world to, fight your petty political battles with your opponents that aren't even your opponents yet. They might even be one day your opponents. He didn't get that memo. He didn't
Yeah,
get
he
it.
also didn't get the memo. He probably shouldn't have wished a happy Memorial Day to the Japanese military on Memorial Day.
Ooh, yeah, no, probably not. Probably not considering who was fighting whom back then. So, yeah, that's the top story. Things haven't changed in the Trump White House. Story number two, also involving the people around Mr. Trump. It looks like Hope Hicks, Hope Hicks, and is that George and his lovely wife?
Simona, yes, I'm calling this one Trump Russia glamour shots.
All right, what's the
There's a
story on
lot,
this?
yeah, there's a lot of outrage because the New York Times did what would people would call this big expose on Hope Hicks that included this photo shoot, apparently. The story was about whether or not she will or should conform with the subpoena. I didn't know that that was optional, though.
Yeah, I thought you had to, and clearly the people in the Trump administration and their associates don't believe they have to. But the law is, by the way, you should know that when a subpoena is issued, you sort of follow the rules. You go show up. Just look at her all forlorn over there. What is she wearing? She looks like she's just come out of, I don't know, a convent. This is not the Hope Hicks we know, and as someone said, this is not Hope's choice. Hope has to do what the law says she has to do, and the New York Times if you don't mind me getting on my pet like hobby horse here,
Go
is
for it.
I just the New York Times' obsession with the seedier, not so nice side of the Trump universe, which includes the Ivanka fetishization, the Jared fetishization, the Hope Hicks thing, where they try to make all these not look great things seem kind of sexy and interesting and desirable, is wrong. It's just wrong. The New York Times used to be able to tell the difference between the good guys and the bad guys, and I know the jury's still out and yada yada, we don't know for sure, but we all kind of know these guys are not to be celebrated in any great way anymore. And just because you did it before and may have sold newspapers doesn't mean you should do it now because you think it's going to sell newspapers, which is basically what I think they're doing. Instead of following the story, chasing after these sort of cheap thrills, they might as well be the New York Post or the New York Daily News. That's just my take on the
Yeah.
day.
But it wasn't just the New York Times. If you
Oh.
take a look at the other photos,
There goes my argument.
This was the Washington Post magazine
Oh.
who did this extensive story and photo shoot on Papa D and his wife Simona. Now, the basis for this story was they're living the Hollywood life now. I think that was the gist of what this story was.
So it's a newsflash because the Washington Post, I think, would have got this, but apparently they don't. These are potentially, probably, likely foreign agents. The Mueller report goes as far to say is that they investigated George Papadopoulos for being an Israeli agent. It's very likely that he was involved in some sort of espionage move to try and damage the American democracy, try and damage the elections. And yes, he went to jail for those very reasons. I do not understand why we feel like we have to create these new massive followings for these people just because they're willing to do an interview with us. You think back to 1989.
The problem is, exactly, Zev, this is why we have Donald Trump. He was created to be this larger-than-life character through reality TV, exposés such as these, and he ended up being president. When is this going to stop?
Even before he was president, you're absolutely right. Because back in 1989, he and Ivana went to Moscow on their first visit there. Looking all very dapper, looking like they were superstars, and celebrated there, and returned here with that same sort of sentiment. What we've now found out many years later is that was an influence operation by then the KGB, now FSB, now GRU. We have to treat these things a little bit more suspiciously. Just because people are offering you a big scoop. And, oh, by the way, George and Simona, you both agreed to be on this show soon, and we hope you will come.
It's true. It's true, you guys.
Here.
They did. They agreed. So we are loving it. We would love to have them on.
We would, and we know it's controversial for our audience, but we have some questions, and we think we'll ask them fairly well. We'd love to have you guys on. In fact, you've agreed. We'll see you here soon. We'll send you the email after the show. That's my soapbox moment on that one.
Can we move on to UFOs now?
Oh yeah, let's make them Dave and Stranger. What's the news on the unidentified flying objects you're reporting?
Yeah, so apparently the Navy confirms that they have been tracking what they are calling as unidentified flying objects for years. And what is even more crazy is that in 2019, this isn't even a big story.
No, it isn't a big story. I've told you not to tell people my big secret, and here you go, blowing it so early in the show. No one needs to know that I don't come from here. It's my secret.
Zev, let's be honest. If they did come here, they would be really disappointed.
Yeah, they'd be like, let's turn this baby around and go back to where we came from.
Exactly.
This place is too weird for our good. Hey, that's interesting news, and thank you for sharing that with us. And, we should move on to our next big story, which is all about the Michael Wolff book.
Yes.
This is you.
Oh, it's me.
It's you, but I can say it.
Oh, I thought we were going to show everybody our awesome peaches and mints.
Oh,
graphic,
I forgot the peaches and mint.
Which we do all the time because we're known for peaches and mint. There we go.
I can't disappoint you. Our peaches and mints thing today is all about Siege.
Exactly.
Which is something we're going to tell you about.
It is. I had not. You and I did a lot of discussing today about this book, Zeb, because if there's one thing about you and I, it's that we can agree to disagree and we can banter back and forth and have good conversation. And that, I think that's part of what makes us work together on this show. And I know we had some different takes on what this book and what these allegations were all about. So why don't you get started?
Yeah, that's Tracy's way of saying we don't quite see eye to eye on this story, but it's true, we don't. And the words Michael Wolff, if they were an adjective, they would mean I'm having a hard time coming to terms with this inconvenient reality. And that's sort of where we were today, or at least I was a part of the day, and Tracy was all of the day. It was that kind of day. It was a Michael Wolff kind of day. You know, Wolff has a new book coming out. It comes out on June 4th, just next week. It's a sequel to his first book called Fire and Fury. That was his first one. And the follow-up contains a couple of stunning allegations, huge bombshells. The new one is called Siege. And the biggest claim Wolff makes is this. He claims that Robert Mueller not only contemplated indicting Donald Trump on 3 counts of obstruction of justice, he actually drafted the indictment documents. And this is the big one. Wolff actually has those indictment documents, charging Donald Trump with 3 indictments. So a huge story.
Yeah.
If this was drafted and never came to reality.
So here's my first question to you. How in the world would Wolff have gotten these drafted documents?
Well, you know, good journalists don't reveal their sources, and he doesn't. He just says that he got it from someone close to the special counsel's office, which could mean anybody from the special counsel himself, because sometimes that is code for that. Or it could mean, you know, anybody close to the special counsel's office, which could be anyone at the DOJ, it could be anybody. But we know he got it in March 2018. So if you're like putting this on a timeline, go back to March 2018, it's over a year ago. The mindset was a little different in March 2018 than it was in April 2019, which is when we got the Mueller report. And, you know, some things changed dramatically over that year. And that might be a reason why the indictments were drafted, if in fact they're true, and the reasoning behind it was drafted, and they were never, ever filed. That's a possibility.
Well, you know, you and I weren't the only ones to have a reaction to this. I mean, Twitter really had a reaction to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, it did. Absolutely. Twitter went crazy today on this story, and rightly so. Firstly, the big thing that happened is Mueller's spokesman, Peter Carr, who we all know from his work throughout the entire Special Commissioner's office journey here. Now, he told The Guardian, the documents that you've described do not exist. That's about as clear a statement as you can make about something like this. And we take his word for it because he's the special counsel spokesman. We got to say it. However, I should remind everyone that
there's a big but to that.
Yeah, the but is, remember the BuzzFeed article where Michael Cohen said, we don't know if it's Michael Cohen, a source told BuzzFeed, which we believe was Michael Cohen, that there was evidence that President Trump had directed Michael Cohen to lie before the Congress, especially when related to the Trump Tower Moscow.
Trump Tower Moscow.
Trump Tower Moscow, I guess. So that turned out to be actually a very true sort of allegation, because now the Intelligence Committee and others have already said that is in fact what it felt like to Michael Cohen, and that's why the FBI has been asked to investigate it. So it's possible that Carr is not being completely honest here. However, we do take his word at face value. So it could be that it's true. Right. Now, to be clear, we don't know that these documents exist. The Guardian newspaper has seen them. So they have been witnessed by an independent journalist, and they didn't think it threw up any sort of alarm bells or concerns. So I'm going to say that, you know, these documents at least appear to be true or real.
Right. And, you know, one thing that we did agree on, Zeb, when we talked about this was, regardless of whether they are authentic or exist, they do seem to go in sync with what we know about Mueller's obstruction of justice investigation based on his own report.
Tracy, that's a really good point. And, you know, we spent all of our time here looking at fact patterns, matching patterns, looking for things that match and timelines that match. And it does feel like these are the kinds of things that Robert Mueller, if he were filing an indictment, he would file them on these counts. And if this was a year ago, it would be pretty remarkable if someone was able to see this a year ahead. So this was probably where Mueller was leaning at the time. That's my opinion, my read on this. I know others would say differently. So here are the claims. Title 18, Section 1505 is count number 1. This is a basic obstruction of justice charge, influencing, obstructing, or impeding a pending proceeding before a department, agency, or of the United States. Count 2, Section 1512, is basically tampering with the witness, And count 3 is Section 1513, charged the president with retaliating against a witness, victim, or informant. Now, this all really does follow what we were reporting a few weeks ago, that there seems to be a fact pattern here, or a crime pattern, where the president and his associates are obstructing justice, with tampering with witnesses, and obstructing justice and the flow of justice. So this does make sense to me. It feels like it's part of that. It was, a year ago. That was the thinking then.
Right, and it's important to remember that in Robert Mueller's report, he presents the reason why there was no indictments as being the OLC guidelines don't allow you to indict a sitting president. But you and I talked, do you think that's the case, or do you think there also could have been some political pressure?
Probably both, I think, are likely. I mean, I'll say this much. In the second section of the Mueller report, he goes quite in depth on obstruction of justice, and he lists 10 very clear incidents where he said the president obstructed justice here, or appeared to be obstructing justice. That's not the kind of thing you write in order not to indict somebody. It's the kind of thing you write because you're going to indict somebody. So it does make me think that ultimately he decided to not prosecute simply because of something else. And that something else was probably the OLC guidelines. That's the guidelines that don't allow a sitting president to be prosecuted or investigated by the Department of Justice. And then the other thing that changed really over the year was Bill Barr showed up. He ultimately changed the game and very much supported or rejected the idea that the president could be in any way investigated or indicted by the Department of Justice. In fact, let me show you what Mueller is said to have said in a document that also Wolf says he has this document. It's a memorandum to support the indictments. And in that, this is potentially Mueller speaking, if you can imagine this. He justifies the indictment this way. The impeachment judgment clause, which applies equally to all civil officers, including the president, takes for granted that an officer may be subject to indictment and prosecution before impeachment. If it did not, the clause would be creating, for civil officers, precisely the immunity the framers rejected. And that does seem to make sense. Ultimately, they would not have said that there is an opportunity for justice and investigation before impeachment unless they wanted it to be there.
Yeah, but once the Mueller report was handed down, by the time Barr was in the picture, seems like a lot of perspectives may have changed.
This is entirely what I think happened. At the end of the day, Barr came into office with the notion that obstruction was not possible to be filed against a president because you couldn't investigate a president. How could you possibly investigate his crime that he was obstructing if that was not possible? So, it could be that Mueller may have wanted to indict the president of the United States, Donald Trump, on 3 counts of obstruction. But when Barr showed up, the things changed. The situation changed, the environment changed, and it's possible that at least he was told maybe not to proceed.
Yeah, well, the bottom line for me, Zeb, and we talked about this earlier as well, I'm not going to go by what a book says. I'm not going to go by what a secondhand source says. I'm not going to go by what Bannon says.
Yeah, Bannon is a source. We know.
I know, we discussed
part of this book is Steve Bannon and Mueller are chit-chatting about the end of the world, and right. He's getting his information from Steve Bannon. To me, that's a good thing. I mean, I would like Steve Bannon as a source. If you want my number, give me a call.
We'll welcome him on the show as well, Zeb.
I agree. Yes, you may not agree with him ideologically, but if anyone knows what's going on, it would be him. So I think that's a good thing, even though people online would disagree.
But, the bottom line for me, and I think for most Americans, is we need to hear it from Mueller. We need public testimony from Mueller. Was he considering indicting on these 3 counts? What happened? Was it the OLC memo? Was it political pressure? Was the investigation shut down? Did he feel like he completed it? Until we get those answers from him, I don't care what book you read or what source you talk to. That's going to be the definitive answer for the American people.
I agree with you. As much as I appreciate that he doesn't want to be turned into political football, it's too late. He is a political football. He's been a political football for the last 2 years, and he probably knew it was going to be a political football when he signed up for this. And we have a special counsel because we trust him. We want to hear it from his mouth. And this is going to be tough. It does mean he might have to go out there and say things that Barr doesn't want to hear, that Trump doesn't want to hear, the Republicans don't want to hear, or maybe even the Democrats don't want to hear. But if we don't hear it from him, there's no point to have gone through this last 2 years. I mean, at the end of the day, we put a lot of eggs in this basket. Some of us might have been disappointed by what we got out of it, but we surely will be disappointed if we don't get to hear from Mueller. And
Right.
Americans
Forgive
like
me
to
if
hear in
I'm wrong.
sequels.
Forgive me if I'm wrong, but the American taxpayers paid for this investigation and for his salary and his team's salary. Am I correct?
You're correct. Some would argue it made a profit because they were able to get
Right?
some proceeds
Right.
back. But
But
yeah, this cost $40 million.
Aren't
It's
we
a lot of money.
entitled? Aren't we entitled to hear what we paid for?
Yes, and I think, this did not quite execute potentially, if you believe Wolf's book, the way Mueller would have wanted to execute it. But that doesn't mean you don't get to testify. That means you have to testify because things didn't quite, they didn't flow through the way maybe you thought they would. And in my mind, if I'm reading this Wolf book correctly, or this, I haven't read the book, so I gotta say that. If I'm reading the leaks that they're giving us about the books, Mueller went in there, got a lot of good information, wanted to indict on obstruction of justice, would have indicted. And then when Barr arrived, the world changed because now you had an AG that was A, not recused, and B, was opposed to prosecuting a president, and C, opposed to prosecuting him on obstruction of justice.
Right.
And that would have changed the entire dynamic. For the whole thing.
Can I just point everybody back to our breaking story at the beginning of the show? If Barr does try to shut down any of these other federal investigations, including SDNY, there is a backup, guys. There are state charges that could be coming. So keep that in perspective.
There's also an indication in that breaking news that you had at the top of the show, because these grand juries might be seated now, that there is a concern that Barr was so tough on Mueller and the Mueller investigation that maybe he's going after the SDNY investigations and the other big investigation in D.C. around Roger Stone. I mean, those could be facing a lot of internal pressure from AG Barr, and maybe that's why New York State has decided to seat a grand jury, if that's in fact what they've done. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes that may be troubling to a lot of us who put a lot of our hopes in a judicial process here. And it may be also why Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to do this. Nancy Pelosi keeps going back to, I don't think I can get an impeachment through the Senate. There's no point in doing it because these political realities are just, they're there. They're real political realities. And maybe you're better off just, investing in the 2020 elections and hoping you do better there.
I'm still ready for impeachment.
Well, I am.
Not that my vote matters on this, but it's something else that we talked about when we talked about impeachment recently is that, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, right?
Right.
So there are more people who want impeachment than those who don't, just if you go by the numbers of votes that Hillary got.
This is true, but also not true, because the majority of people are still not saying they want impeachment proceedings. I think it's a lower figure. And that is why I think there are people saying, don't go there. Which means, I guess the American people have sort of come to the conclusion that they know the president of the United States is potentially a criminal, potentially has done bad things to get into power, may have even cheated, but they're maybe okay with that for now. And that's a shock to all of us. Not because they don't think he's, that doesn't mean they want to support him next time around. They may not do any of that stuff, but they just don't want him or to drag the country or him through an impeachment process. So that may be a reality of what we're going through right now.
It may be, but it sure doesn't set a good precedent for the future, Zev.
No, it doesn't. And, all we can be thinking now is that these 14 prosecutions are left alone, which they probably are not going to be. The spin-off prosecutions from the Mueller report, but also that democracy works the way it should work in 2020, because there's no guarantee that the polls won't be tampered with, that the disinformation won't continue. In fact, we know it will. So that's why we're here. That's why we're keeping a very careful watch on what's going on at Narrative. Time now for our news flash. This is one we're calling a great master fraud. Like you got to get him like great masterpiece, great master fraud.
I gotcha. I
That's pretty.
gotcha.
I was trying to be very creative. So, if you're a reader of the blog NarativLive, you would have known this in January that there were lots of questions around the Da Vinci's, so-called Da Vinci's Salvator Mundi, which was to go on display in Abu Dhabi, but never did because we didn't know why it never did. Although we suspected it may had something to do with the fact that it wasn't really a Da Vinci. Well, lo and behold. According to the Guardian newspaper, talking to Ben Lewis, the author of a new book called The Lost Leonardo, it's not real. It's not real. The Da Vinci's did not have any, well, he might have had something to do with it, but the Mundi is not a Leonardo da Vinci entirely. In fact, it's more likely that it was a product of his workshop, is what the Louvre wants to call it when they do present it to the world. And so they've decided, in fact, not to present it because who wants to have a $450 million investment shown at the Louvre as not being what it is, which would take the value down by $448 million to only $1.5 million. So that's significant.
Seb, when we first put out the story in January, we got so much attention for it. I think, and we weren't like art historians or anything like that, but boy, did we talk to a lot of people, and in fact, people comment all the time to me that don't even know about our blog that aren't you guys the Mundi people? Yes, that was us.
It's been read by so many people, almost like 200,000 people, which is our most successful story. It tells you a little bit about the mystique of Da Vinci. I think that there's so much interest in anything he does, whether it's just a book that might have his name in the title or even a fake piece of art. There's an interest in it. This one was even more interesting because $450 million was spent on it. It's not the real thing. It leads me to the very big question of why. Like, at the end of the day, maybe you buy a piece of art for $450 million just because you have so much money. But the more likely reality is that you're buying it because of some other reason. You're not being that fooled into something. I mean, I'm not an art historian. You're not an art historian. I looked at this thing and I was like, it's okay. It's okay. Right? It looks like someone tried to do the Mona Lisa, but gave him an orb and made him look more regal in it. But it doesn't feel legit. In fact, Ben Lewis, who's the author of this book, who we'd also like to talk to on the show, says the provenance is speculative, the attribution optimistic, the restoration extensive, and the price exorbitant. A potpourri of vested interest has combined to turn a workshop painting into a Leonardo. And that about sums it up. It's a really, really interesting take on the story. And there's one more thing we should share, because why we wrote the story was because it had everything to do with the Trump-Russia investigation that we had been doing. And that investigation basically led us to the point that we were no longer thought we were just dealing with Russia. We weren't just looking at the collusion between Trump and Russia. It looked to us, and this is a quote from the Salvator Mundi story, it looked to us like a multinational conspiracy of at least 4 countries, including Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Israel, were all involved in the conspiracy together. And that maybe the Salvator Mundi being sold by the oligarch Rybolovlev to the Saudi crown prince Mohammed bin Salman was perhaps part of this, was perhaps part of this multinational conspiracy. Maybe they were paying off for something, maybe they weren't. So that's our take. If you haven't read the story, it's still on our blog, NarativLive.org. Yes. Salvator Mundi. For those people who thought we were conspiracy theorists, I think this one lends credence to the fact that we're not, because we at least know the thing is it's not real. And so anyone who thinks it was real, check your facts. And now it's time for the tweet of the day. I think I may have lost the music in the middle of that. If you did, I apologize.
No, I heard it.
So we do have the tweet of the day. Who would you give the tweet of the day to today? Because it's the second time we're awarding this, and it's very important. And I've lost you. I've lost you. One second. Tracy, I lost you. Are you there?
Can you hear me?
Oh, it's happened again. Let's try this. Tracy, you there?
I'm here.
So this happened before the show. I don't know if you can hear me still, but I can't hear Tracy. Can you hear me, Tracy? Just like smile, wave. No, you can hear me. All right. I'll just keep talking. We're going to fix this. We're going to get Tracy back. We'll also reveal who the tweet of the day is. But in the meantime, I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to try sort this out in the next 90 seconds or so. And here's a little bit of our promo branding for the Patreon campaign that is ending tonight. So if you still want to be a Patreon member, go to patreon.com/narrative. Sign up today. It's
Our founding fathers drafted a charter to assure the rule of law and the rights of man.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
Those ideals still light the world, and we will not give them up for expedience sake.
Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountain.
America is the land where dreams can come true for all of us.
When we allow freedom ring,
Flags of freedom fly all over Europe.
every business and every hamlet, from every state and every freedom.
Walk
We
together.
will be able to speed up that day when all the children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles,
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
And we are free at last. Tracy, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
I'm
Technology
so sorry,
worked.
you guys.
It's probably my fault, so I'll take the heat for it. But welcome back, Tracy. And it was a good cliffhanger because you're about to reveal who the much anticipated winner of the tweet of the day is today.
It's me.
You gave yourself the
I gave
the
it to
award.
myself. I did.
That's nice that you gave yourself the only award we give.
Well, I deserved it today because
Why
let
did
me
you give it
just
to
tell
yourself?
you.
Yeah.
I went to the salon. I got my hair done. I also got my toes did, right? So
Yeah, you gotta get
I had,
those things.
I had my toes under this little warmer heater thing, drying them, and I looked down and there's a stack of magazines, and guess who's looking up at me?
Who's looking
this
up at
guy
you?
right there, Don
Oh.
Jr.
Well, there you go, Don Jr. I mean, but, I'm
Well,
sorry about
Zeb,
that.
here's
Your hair
the
looks
point.
amazing, though.
Thank
and that's
you.
really good.
Thank
and
you.
I'm glad
My
you were able
toes
to
look
get...
fantastic too.
But I haven't seen your toes. That's okay. I don't have to.
The point is, I can't even take a few hours out of my life to go relax at the spa without seeing a Trump.
And it's basically the story of our lives these days. None of us can get away from these guys until we get away from them, which is where we hopefully might be going. That's our show for
So
today.
I think I deserved that one.
You do deserve the treat of the day, and for that, I would give you an award. I have some crazy glue because you're crazy. Congratulations,
You
Tracy.
wouldn't love me any other way.
I wouldn't. And now, finally, we end the show as we do for this entire Patreon campaign with a little look at a quote from the founders. Is Thomas Jefferson? Yes.
Yes.
Let's read it. When the people fear their government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. So where are we right now? We're probably in the first part of that, and maybe move towards the second. That's our show for tonight.
And I want to thank everybody. This 2 weeks, I know that we have been really, really pushing our Patreon on you guys on Twitter and on during our shows. But the bottom line is we want to reach as many people as possible going into the 2020 election. It's important. We feel that there is a need for our independent journalism, and the only way we can do it is if you join our team. And it's as cheap as $3 a month, and it's what's going to keep Zev and I going. And we're doing this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week right now, and you're burning the candle at both ends. Is that what they say? Zev?
They
I
say
don't
that,
know.
and it's true in this case.
But it's got to also pay the bills. It's got to pay for us. We'd like to get out in the field and talk to voters and go to some candidate events. And, we need your help or we won't be able to do that.
That's well said, Tracy. Please go to patreon.com/narrative. There's several tiers there for you to take part in. $3 is the base, and we're worth it because we're here to look out for you. We're basically watching after a democracy and making sure that everyone's telling the truth. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again in the next couple of days.
Thanks, guys.